Good evening. Welcome to Tsukiji Honganji Buddhist Temple. Please join me in Gassho. Please bow. Thank you for coming to the Tsukiji Honganji Buddhist service. We would also like to extend a warm welcome to those who are watching the service online. First, we would like to begin the service by reciting the Aspiration, which can be found on page 1 in the blue service book.
Aspiration. Reverently, we come before the shrine of our Amida Buddha, the Holy One, the Perfect One. With gratitude, we have brought our offering of love and devotion to honor the Buddha. We earnestly resolve to strive to understand the holy teaching and to walk every day in the blessed path, so that, like the Buddha, may we attain the peace of Nirvana.
We will chant Sutra, Jusei. Please turn to page 3 of the blue service book. will sing gatha, Shinshu anthem. On page 2, congregation, please rise. Please remain standing for reciting the three treasures found on page 5 in the Blue Service Book.
The three treasures. Difficult is it to receive a human form? No, we are living it. Difficult is it to hear the Dharma of the Buddha? No, we hear it. If we do not cross over to the truth in the present life, in what life shall we cross over? Let us, with sincerity and true reverence, take refuge in the three treasures of the truth. I take refuge in the Buddha. May we, together with all sentient beings, awaken to the great way of enlightenment and to the unsurpassed intent of Amida Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. May we, together with all sentient beings, enter the storehouse of the Dharma, becoming like the wisdom ocean. I take refuge in the Sangha. May we, together with all sentient beings, become units in true accord, in harmony with all things. The peerless, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rare to encounter, even in many hundreds and thousands of kalpas. Now we are privileged to hear and receive it. Let us thoroughly understand the true meaning of Tathagata's teachings. Namo Amida Butsu. 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 Namo.
This evening, we are so happy to have Reverend Bettina LAGNER-TERAMOTO, Minister and Bomori of Gokurakuji Temple in Osaka, as our guest speaker. Reverend Teramoto will talk on the German perspective on Jodo Shinshu, Nembutsu in daily life. Due to the pandemic, Reverend Teramoto will be giving her Dharma message by a recorded video.
Welcome everybody to the English Dharma talk of the Tsukiji Hongwanji in 2022 February. Please join me in Gassho. Namanda, Butsu Namanda, Butsu Namanda, Butsu Namanda, Butsu Namanda. At first, I want to recite the three treasures in Pali and in English. Please join me if you can. Buddhaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saraṇaṃ gacchāmi. I go to the Buddha for refuge. I go to the Dharma for refuge. I go to the Sangha for refuge. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda, Butsu Namanda, Butsu Namanda, Butsu Namanda, Butsu Namanda. Today, I want to talk about Sangha, what it means to us. And for this, I have invited two eminent guests, which is Harry Pieper from the 1960s in Germany, and Shinra Chonin and his Mato Sho letters, which were written around the 1260s, 700 years before. And my humble self, my name is Bettina LAGNER-TERAMOTO, and I am born in the 1960s when Harry Pieper was most active in Germany, and now I live over 30 years in Japan. I am the Bomori of Osaka Gokurakuji, and I am a lecturer at Kyoto Women's University. We did the three treasures today, and I think it's very important to think why the Sangha is one of the three treasures. And I would like to invite you to really have your own question. I raise my questions and I address to the questions of the two speakers, but in most of the times we get the answer before we even have a question. And this might be the reason that some, for example, kids don't want to learn this because they think, it's not what I need for my life. And in Dharma talks too, it might be that we don't follow and cannot imagine what the person is explaining, but some glimpse in each Dharma talk touch our heart, I hope, and I hope that you can get this spark of the Dharma through my talk. And here is a definition of Sangha so that we stand on the same ground. I thought it's interesting. In Hinduism, it's a group of seekers who gather around a master in order to attain with his help spiritual knowledge and realization of the highest truth. And as there was not such an established school when Shinran was alive, I think this is pretty close to Shinran's situation and also Haripipa's. Later, in Buddhism, it means the Buddhist community. In a narrow sense, the Sangha consists of monks, nuns, and novices. In a wider sense, the Sangha also includes lay followers, all of us. The Sangha is one of the three precious ones. A little bit about me and my path with searching the path. I had so much help from many Sanghas, so I want to explain a bit about it. I was born in Cologne, and it's a Christian background, and I didn't feel so comfortable with Christianity. And I had some kind of vague feelings that I want to be free from my ego, free from this limited self, and free of all these feelings of hate and greed, and be more wise, be free of my ignorance. And when I learned about Buddhism, I was really surprised that what I always thought about was actually a religion that existed already 2,500 years. I was so happy. I felt, wow, this is a religion for me. But here's the Cologne Cathedral, and all of the religions have this big importance on light, as you can see in the glass windows of the churches too. And actually, my first Sangha was a Zen group in Tsukiji. And I lived there for a while, and we were practicing Zen. And it is really a wonderful path, and I would love to be able to walk it, but I found I want to have a secular life too, and I was interested in lay Buddhism and Pure Land Buddhism. And especially I met Nishi Hongwanji's teachers and Jodo Shinshu. And I got a wonderful chance to learn with many eminent senseis. I just mentioned some of them here, and especially also their books. And one of them is actually Ishida Hoyo Sensei, who will speak in March to you in the Dharma talk. And the first time I met him on a conference, I was really overwhelmed by so much information about Jodo Shinshu and Amida and what is Jodo. And I was just sitting there and I said, what is Amida? What is Amida? And I asked Ishida Sensei in a coffee break. And I hoped that he would not laugh at me. And I think I caused him a lot of trouble, because how to answer this in a coffee break? And I actually don't remember his answer. Sorry. But I got the message that I should listen more and I should think by myself. And this is what I'm doing since 30 years. So I think that was basically his answer. And when I kind of changed from Zen Buddhism to Shin Buddhism, I wasn't aware that this difference between the monastic schools and the lay Buddhism has led to many reciprocal criticism during the history. I learned this much later. And when I was in Ryokoku University, I had a scholarship of Numata Foundation, and I was really so blessed with many Dharma friends, and we had study groups about the Tanisho, about the basic teachings of Buddha. But somewhere in my heart, I didn't feel in a Sangha. I felt kind of alone because the Japanese people around me had such a different background, such different questions, that I felt solitary, even being in the very center of Shin Buddhist tradition, next to Hongwanji in Gokurakuji University. It couldn't be a better place to be. And this was kind of my illusion too, because I couldn't see how much I was cared for and how our human dilemma is basically the same, crossing the borders of nationality. But at that time, I couldn't realize that deeply. And I found another Sangha, actually, in this European Shin conference. The first one I visited was in Vienna in 1990. And a similar crowd of very different people joined. And I was so impressed that women and men and students and eminent senseis and Europeans and Japanese people were interacting on a very equal ground. And I thought, this is a place for me. This is my Sangha, and here I can follow, this Buddhism I can follow in my life. So I got a lot of confidence meeting all these wonderful people. And this story of the European Jodo Shinshu development started actually with one person in Germany called Harry Pieper. And I today want to talk about him, but I let him talk, let's say. So the Shin conference, just a small introduction here, are held every 2 years and are organized in turns by the European Sanghas. This is a lot of work and really needs a lot of logistics, with the financial and logistical support of the IAVC, the International Association of Buddhist Culture, to which I also belong to. And the languages are really amazing. There are English, German, French, Polish, Dutch, Portuguese, Romanian, and even more languages that the people have taken part. Some of them did translations, and all of us communicate in English. But as you can imagine, in times of Corona, we have difficulties to plan such an international conference. And in the 1991, I had to move back to Germany to do my master course. And as an architecture student, not in the letter section, I had very few chances to talk about Buddhism, meet other Buddhists, or even have a ceremony or some kind of study together. So I was really alone, and this is true actually for many members of the European Sangha who are scattered about the European map. So at that time, my companions were Shinran's translated books, especially the Tani Show, and newsletters made by the Swiss Sangha in French, the Belgian Sangha in Dutch, and later the German Sangha in German. And they were sent by mail, by post. So you can see in a time without translation software how many language barriers we always have and had still to overcome to receive the teaching. And the biggest one is still Japanese and Chinese kanjis. Yeah. This is why this lecture offers such a precious chance for people not able to understand Japanese talks here in Japan. And I'm very honored to make a contribution. Thank you very much for inviting me. So time passed quickly, and I visited many conferences, but in all of them we had such a great support by the Otani family. The first photo you see is the first European Shin conference in Belgium, Antwerp, in 1980. At that time, Kosho Otani, the then Monshu, gave Kikyoshiki, the ceremony of taking refuge, to Gerhard Kell, who turned out to be a very important translator of texts into German. And the second photo, as you know, this is a present Monshu, at that time Shinmon, and he took part in many conferences, and this photo is from the 15th European Shin Conference in Bad Reichenhall in 2008. They were listening to the lectures and also kindly giving Kikyoshiki to, I think, 8 people at that time. So I decided to be a Jodo Shinshu priest and be able to pass on the teaching to others. And for this, we founded another association called the Association of Foreign Women of Japanese Temples. And I really, through this video, I also want to invite people who are in a similar situation to me to join us. I want to revive this group in a time of online meetings. I think it will be possible. In 2000 to 2010, we had yearly meetings in the Kokusei Center, in the International Center in Kyoto, and lectures and seminars by several speakers, especially Shigaragi Takamaru Sensei, who supported us really tremendously. And this is a very important Sangha for me too. And I married a priest of Osaka Gokurakuji, and I now in the position to be the Bomori, which means temple protector. And I can really feel that responsibility. So we have to care now the person who was really alone without any Sangha. Now I'm the one who have to care for our Japanese Sangha. We give them spiritual guidance and have ceremonies with them, but we also have to protect these temple facilities, that everybody feels welcome anytime in the religious space. For this, we made the renovation of the wooden structure of this hondo and the guest rooms to secure safety in case of earthquake, which is a big problem in Japan. And this is the Shunkoshiki, it's called the opening ceremony after the renovation. And this is now my Sangha, my Japanese Sangha. And I'm really in depth to each of these persons who guide me and help us, support us in many ways. And if you are interested in how this ceremony went on, you can look YouTube, Osaka Gokurakuji Shunkoshiki, 2019, 10/24 is the date. And for all these gatherings, as you will also know, the informal time is actually really important. To share, for example, eating and drinking makes us open up and makes us feel part of a group. And all this is now getting so difficult. So we are very worried how the people feel, if they really still have this strong feeling of belonging to our temple. And here you see just a few of the temple ladies and Sevakata, the men who support us during all the year to prepare the Dharma talks, especially. And sometimes we, of course, prepare traditional and seasonal food. And one activity is always on the Buddha's birthday, Hana Matsuri, that we invite some person who can show the international side of culture and Buddhism, and we invite children and adults to experience that we are all interrelated on this big earth, on this globe. And also I believe that if you experience play and enjoyment in the temple space, it might give the children in the future this chance when they get adults that they can enter the temple more easily. The people I meet now when I go to their house and have a ceremony, they often tell me, yeah, I was a child and it was so great to have the Sunday school. So these memories are really important. And we try to make it as fun as possible. For example, we invited 2 senseis and musicians from Brazil and Argentina, and they had a concert and a Dharma talk, and also we learned the Nembutsu dance. You can see this also on Facebook, actually. The kids had really a lot of fun. Yeah, this was a little bit about my background, and now I want to talk about Haripipa and how he was really moved and impressed by meeting Otanikoshu Monshu in Berlin in 1954. And he got first interested into the teaching by meeting Professor Yamada. And he found his spiritual home after first belonging to other Buddhist schools, I think because he met people who embodied the teaching of Jodo Shinshu in their lives with their full being. And this is one reason I think why Sangha is so important. It is wonderful to read the teaching, but if we meet at least one person who really lives it in this my time, I get moved and I feel I can follow this. So this is pictures from a publication you can find here from IBC. And now I want to quote several passages of the newsletter of this young German Jodo Shinshu group, and they called it Mahayana, and the general secretary was Haripipa himself, but the publisher was somebody from Austria. You see already in the beginning they worked really internationally. And you can find the German version on the Jodo Shinshu auf Deutsch, the Swiss Sangha's homepage actually. And I translated it by myself to English. So the first one is, of course, an article called Sangha. And it was written for a Dharma talk in 1967, also for Buddha's birthday. I quote, "The different sects and schools of Buddhism should by no means be seen as deviation, but as proof of the liveliness of the teaching. Only a dead tree will not have new sprouts, smaller and bigger branches." So already in this time, there was some criticism among different Buddhist schools in Germany. And Pipa was really expressing the wish for being tolerant to each other and work together. And how this first meeting between Monshu Kosho Otani and Haripipa happened was recorded by a Hawaiian lady, and she just passed away. That's why I got this news through somebody who wrote an article about her. She's called Lily Hodio from Hawaii. And she met Haripipa in Germany in 1958. She said, "Mr. Pipa said, well, when I met the Monshu Kosho Otani, just watching the Monshu made me feel like I would like to follow this man. Mr. Pipa was very impressed with the compassionate feeling that the Monshu showed, so he really started to get interested in Jodo Shinshu. And I had a very similar experience meeting the Zen Mon Sama and Urakata Sama several times on these international conferences." And she also reports how Haripipa must have studied really hard. she said, I told him there aren't too many materials in German, so how do you study? And Mr. Pieper said the Hongwanji International Center in Kyoto sent him English materials, and every night he spent hours and hours translating everything into German. And he and a few friends were meeting at his house and studying the teachings. And Lily said, I was very impressed with how much he was studying, even though he didn't have much material. I felt very ashamed of myself because we grew up with all of the materials around us and we weren't really putting in even half the time and energy he was doing. I think this is actually the case with us now, because we have all the material on the internet and in libraries and bookstores. And we are in Japan, most of us watching this video. So we have everything around, no excuse not to read the original text. And through the compassionate work of others who translate the sutras, commentaries, and articles for us, we can now read them in English or even in other European languages. How much do we really appreciate this? So Harry Pieper and his group started to have this newsletter to be connected to the members who were spread out in other countries. And he encouraged people to found their own Sangha. And he said, people who criticize us or should not be criticized from our side, because each way is one of the 84,000, sorry, Japanese numbers and English numbers, 84,000 gates to enlightenment which Shakyamuni opened to us. So we should all walk together this path, even we have a different understanding of the teaching. And in another sense, but he was often met with criticism from outside, and he said it was like an attitude. We find the same arrogance as to say, I know it better, and you will have to struggle to get my knowledge. Otherwise, you cannot count on the liberation from your suffering. So not an open criticism, but a kind of feeling of superiority. I got it, and you have to really keep on studying. I think maybe some of us have experienced this situation. This is a quote from the article The Path from issue number 4. So there are many other texts addressing this problem. And I started thinking, this is what I read somewhere. And I remember the Mato Show and also, of course, the Tani Show, the first book that impressed me so much. So I thought maybe the very early Sangha in Shinran's lifetime and the very early Sangha of Hari Pieper might have some similarities, even they are so different in historical time and place. One problem, as I just started to address, is the problem of the transmission of the correct teaching without sufficient Buddhist education of the members and without much written material. Really imagine this. I mean, Chonin was teaching to peasants in many cases, and they couldn't read, or you had to copy each letter or each text passage by hand. So there was not much they could study on their own. And the other problem is the hostility between different schools of Buddhism, leading sometimes to slandering the Dharma, especially the difference of the monastic schools and the lay schools. So I started to dig into this a little bit deeper, and that you can follow my path of thinking, I just summarized of his Sangha in this period, 1214 to 1235, when he lived in Kanto. He taught to many people and had many disciples. Even he denied it in one of his famous quotes. Then he moved back to Kyoto, and until the end of his life, he lived in Kyoto, keep studying and writing. And his disciples sometimes asked him questions in the letters, and he would write an answer, and this is collected in the Mato Sho. We got this collection because these letters were copied often and often, and we have Renyo's copy that was preserved, so we have these letters. And you see, it's the last letter is in his last year. He lived until 90, and the last letter is really of a mature man who devoted all his life to Jodo Shinshu's teaching. So I use this cover picture. It's by Jerome Lecour, an excellent scholar from Switzerland, and he wrote this book, Shinra, un réformateur bouddhiste dans le Japon médiéval, an reformator, Buddhist reformator in Japanese medieval times. And I just use it as a sign that this is a quote from Shinra to make you feel the dialogue between Haripipa and Shinra. So, what is Shinran's opinion on this problem? On page 25 of the publication of the Kokusai Center, we find, you should know that this Shinjin is bestowed through the compassionate means of Shakyamuni, Amida, and all the Buddhas in the quarters. Therefore, you should not disparage the teaching of others or the people who perform good acts other than Nembutsu. Neither should you despise those who scorn and slander people of the Nembutsu. Rather, you should have compassion and care for them. It's a really big statement, I think. You should even have compassion for the people that slander your group. Shinran Chonin explained in Mato Sho, for example, on page 31, simply achieve your birth, firmly avoiding all scholarly debate. And in other passages, he explains how deplorable it is that people with much knowledge look down on people who cannot read the scriptures. But maybe less famous, on the other hand, I want to quote page 60. It has not been uncommon for people like yourselves who do not read or know the scriptures to distort the teaching, having heard that no evil interferes with the attainment of birth. It seems that this is still the case. To hear that you are falling deeper and deeper into error, following the words of Shinkembo and others who know nothing of the Jodo teaching, is truly lamentable. I think for us, I'm speaking for a person not born in a traditional Jodo Shinshu environment. We are not, with all our cells, embedded in the teaching already. So for us, I think some basic knowledge or hearing the teaching is really an important aspect. And here is a similar answer to what Haripipa was thinking. It is from 1967, the article about Sangha. So what is the meaning of the Sangha? And what should we do? The only meaningful thing is for our small community that we keep walking unwaveringly the path shown to us of the practice of the Nembutsu, which means the constant thinking of the Buddha. It means that in this thinking, we opened our point of view constantly to extend limitations of word and reach far-reaching concepts. In this way, we will gradually be a radiating point of Buddha's spirit. This will be realized when we give up our personal and limited self. So he also describes what we can do to think of the Buddha constantly, and he describes that there will be a process that gradually we will radiate from ourselves, because we could give up some false concepts and our own hakarai, how it's said in Japanese. As you might know, I don't want to go too deep into this, Shinran 2 can be misunderstood in the way that you can do any kind of evil because it's no hindrance to birth in the Pure Land. But I think this passage really shows that it's up to what the other person is in need of, that we use this way to explain it or another. So also he talks about kind of a process of hearing the teaching. In people who have long heard the Buddha's name and said the Nembutsu, surely there are signs of rejecting the evil of this world and sign of their desire to cast off the evil in themselves. This is very similar to what just Haripipa said. When people first begin to hear the Buddha's vow, they wonder, having become thoroughly aware of the karmic evil in their hearts and minds, how they will ever attain birth as they are. To such people we teach that since we are possessed of blind passions, the Buddha receives us without judging whether our hearts are good or bad. So it's kind of cheering up the person who has gone to hell, to the depths of their dark side, of their dark self. To them, it is a kind of a spark of light that you are saved, even though you might have bad intentions. But this doesn't mean that we are supposed to not want to be casting off the evil in ourselves. If we are able or not is another question, but the wish to cast off the evil of this world is same as a wish to go to the Pure Land. So when people meet and come together, so what are they doing? What actually is a practical side? And often this is starts with a ceremony. And Haripipa wrote in his newsletter, we accept the fact of the transmission of certain religious ceremonies in the simple understanding that they are a precious means to make a connection between the high goals of our Buddhist religion and our daily life. Many times we had the experience, each one for himself, that nothing leaves such a deep and unforgettable imprint in our consciousness as words and pictures in a simultaneous working. I think this is an explanation why we have such a very highly decorated altar. And I use this picture because this is an altar of the German Sangha, and this is probably what most of the Sanghas arrange for their meetings: a candle, a flower, incense burner, some kind of honzon. It can be a scroll or a figure, and some offerings like the local fruits. So there was not a very eloquent and gorgeous way to decorate, but it doesn't matter. In 1956, the Buddhist Association of Jodo Shinshu was founded in Berlin, and after that, a few years after that, the Berlin Hongwanji was founded in this right side, in this room. But it ended in 1964 due to financial reasons. This is probably how the altar looked in this Hongwanji. And the friends, how they interact with each other. Pipa worked really hard all his life, and he passed away in 1974. And he was the first Nembutsu person in Europe, so he's revered by other Sanghas too, in Switzerland and in England and Germany, for example. So the similarities I just summarized in my words: a leading person as a start of Sangha activities, first spreading the Dharma in words, then get together for religious learning, exchange, and ceremonies, mostly in private spaces, or in simple dojos and meeting rooms. The transmission of the founder's works, in this case Shinra and San and Pipa, were transmitted by letters or newsletters. The funding was only by donation of members and very few other supporters. And the building of the network with other dojos and other centers is an important task for the young Sangha. But the main interest is in hearing and spreading the teaching, and they arise spontaneously without a prescribed hierarchy and strict rules. They are local and independent and self-organized, and liturgy and ornamental work probably minimal. So here this quote really summarizes what was Pipa's deep conviction and how he really wanted to work for his Sangha. He talks about this figure. He stood up. In our temples, we find, in order to keep this fact always in mind, a representation of the Buddha who stood up from his meditation position, who, I will say it again, out of great compassion, gave up the passive attitude and the quiet, peaceful enjoyment of what he achieved. And to strive after him, the dynamic Buddha, is our task, which means to work filled with compassion and pity. This working is not a constant repetition of holy words, but a serving act for all living and suffering beings. It's almost like the translation of Ganishi Kudoku, no? That we all equally go, wish that all equally go to the Pure Land. And to summarize, the German Sangha and the development after Pipa would be really enough for another Dharma talk. But I just want to say that I'm really grateful and in debt to each of these persons. It's like a chain or like a relay of the flame of the Dharma. And each of this person, one person missing, and it might not have reached me. So their effort is really a tremendous help for my path, to go on with my path. And I will come to the end. So why we should work for the Sangha and other people and help to spread the teaching is based on the very principles of Mahayana Buddhism. I quote Pipa's Buddha's birthday speech from 1965, which is actually the year I am born, so I feel a very personal connection here. The root of the Dharma is a very critical and rational understanding of life. The realization of this Dharma is shown best in the ideal of the Sangha, the community in which this ideal will be put into practice. Buddhism is, and we also should never overlook this, not only a religion of enlightenment of the self, but includes the liberation of the community through enlightenment. In Mahayana Buddhism, we feel more touched by the problems of the community than by the problems of one's own self. There cannot be a true liberation of the self when not all beings are equally liberated. This really is convincing for me, and we can also find the spirit in the larger sutra, in the 48 vows, but again, this would be for another lecture. And in the next 2 minutes, I want to explain my own humble conclusion. And my humble summary is a quote from the Tanisho, again the translation of the International Center in Kyoto. In chapter 2, it is written that people traveled at the risk of their lives to ask Shinran about the Nembutsu path. But he said, "As for me, I simply accept and entrust myself to what my revered teacher told me. Just say the Nembutsu and be saved by Amida. Nothing else is involved." Beyond this, whether you take up and accept the Nembutsu or whether you abandon it is for each of you to determine. I mean, imagine you walk 2 weeks through mountains and valleys and ask your question, and you get such a simple answer. Just say the Nembutsu and be saved by Amida. This is really a big teaching, I can say. And I also want to summarize it somehow this way, that on the one hand, we are very supported by the Sangha, and it's very helpful to do all these Sangha connections and translations and have the Dharma talks and support each other. But in the very core, each of us is born alone and has to die alone, and we have to face the religious truths, each of us. And there we face our true self, our not so beautiful self sometimes, and just look at Amida's glaring light face, as it's maybe difficult to see in our temple. So these two meeting is the Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu, Namu Amida Butsu. So in the end, I want to just quote again the Mahayana Yudhishthira. This is the first issue, and what he wrote is very amazing, what they already did in that early Sangha, and they give us a big question. Your community, this is true actually for Japan and for many communities overseas in Hawaii and in America and in Europe, Brazil, Argentina, just to name a few, Australia. Your community helps you by holding ceremonies, lectures, family ceremonies, funerals, marriages, etc. By publishing of religious books and papers, by personal advice on religious and ethical questions, by education of young people and social work, by making international connections. What do you do for your community? So if you have time and the situation, maybe talk with the people around you about this subject. And I'm really grateful that in the time of Corona, I can talk to you through this video and maybe to other people watching it near or far. And even it's sometimes prevents us from being in the same space and really interacting directly. Let's see it as a positive chance for people to take part couldn't come to that venue and couldn't join us today. So please feel connected to the Sanghas around you, and let's keep walking on the path of Shinra Chonin. Namandabutsu, 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 Namandabutsu. Please join me in Gassho. Namandabutsu, 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 Namandabutsu. Excuse me.
Thank you very much, Teramoto Sensei. Thank you very much for watching. Now we will sing Gatha Namo Amida Butsu on page 6. Congregation, please rise. Please be seated. Please be seated. Let us recite together the Shinshu Creed found on page 1 in the same book. Followed will be the recitation of the Benediction.
The Shinshu Creed. We single-heartedly take refuge upon Tathagata Amitabha for the enlightenment in the life to come, abstaining from all sundry practices and teachings, and giving up the trust in our powerless self. We believe that the assurance of our rebirth comes at the very moment we are led to entrust upon the Buddha, and we call the name Namo Amida Butsu in happiness and thankfulness for his great compassion. We also acknowledge gratefully the benign benevolence of our founder and the succeeding masters who have led us to believe in this profound teaching, and we now endeavor to follow throughout our lives the way laid down for us. Amida Buddha surrounds all men and all forms of life with infinite life and light. Particularly does the Buddha send forth loving thoughts to those in suffering and sorrow, to all those in doubt and ignorance, to all who are striving to attain truth, and to those whose feet are standing close to the great change men call death. Amida Buddha sends forth oceans of wisdom and compassion. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namandas, 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 namandas. Oh.
I would like to thank all of you for your attendance tonight. The next service will be held on March 27th at 5:30 p.m. in this same room. The guest speaker will be Reverend Ishida Hoyu, Professor Emeritus of University of Shiga Prefecture. And the topic will be encountering what is transient and what is unsurpassed. We look forward to seeing you again. Please put your hands together in Gassho. Please bow. Once again, thank you for attendance tonight.
停止ですか。停止。お疲れ様でした。まさかの初のオンラインも何